Back in college, a friend of mine was studying film, and I remember him saying to me he felt animation was the purest form of the medium. Now, I know what you're thinking. Who'd want to be friends with this obnoxious dickhead? And/or, what does Kev think the purest form of video games are? Well, to me it's platformers. Think about it. They're one of the earliest breakout genres for gaming, with its most enduring and recognizable characters. Platformers have also had constant relevance throughout gaming history. From Nintendo's AAA efforts to smaller indie devs, which adore the genre due to its simplicity, lending itself to far more experimentation. Despite all that, there's been a major gap in platformers for years. 3D platformers. But K-Dog, there's a whole bunch of 3D platformers. The Switch is a treasure trove for them. Is it? Aside from remakes and ports, do you know how many original platformers by Nintendo the Switch has? 2. Mario Odyssey, which came out at launch in, Jesus Christ, 2017, and Kirby and the Forgotten Land. Well, 2.5 if we include Bowser's Fury, which is built on top of Mario 3D World, but that base game is over 10 years old. And it's a real shame because Nintendo is famous for 3D platformers, and they're not alone in their neglect. These days, a lot of heavy hitters are regressing back to 2D with varying degrees of success, which is even spread to games that were famously 3D. Point in case Rayman. Sure, he started as a side-scroller, but that initial game was, what's the word? Oh yeah, shit.
No toilet paper can handle that!
That's not to say Rayman Origins and Legends are lesser than the 3D games. They kick ass. It's just that they don't make the 2D alongside the 3D style games, and a lot of AAA developers just kinda don't anymore. Sure, there's still indie games like Spark the Electric Jester, Hat in Time, and according to Steam, Squirrel with a Gun. But there's something about a AAA 3D platformer that hits differently, which is why I'm so happy to say,
We're back, baby!
For those that have been around the channel for a while, you may remember an obnoxiously terrible video I made.
Which one? They all suck! Got him!
It's this one, don't watch it. What I don't regret from it was naming Astro's Playroom my 3rd favorite game that year. The rest of that list though, oof. Shining Pearl, I put a 5. Metroid Dread, Resident Evil 8, and Hitman 3 all came out that year. What was wrong with me? Some people may say Astro's Playroom was just a tech demo to show off the PS5's hardware, but they're doing a massive disservice to the work Team Asobi did creating that game. In fact, the only complaint I and a lot of people had at the time was that it wasn't a true full game, an issue Sony and Team Asobi have resolved with the self-titled and rather confusingly named Astro Bot. Seriously, a buddy of mine who loved the original one had no idea this game was a thing because of the name. This is of course a different friend to the one I mentioned before at the start, and yeah, I'm actually kind of shocked I have friends plural. Anyway, Astro Bot is hands down one of the most joy-inspiring games I've played in years. Kicking off with Astro and friends in his brand synergistic spaceship, presumably hitting up some kind of PlayStation-themed cosplay event, before a giant piece of snot fucks them up, leaving them stranded like Tom Hanks in that one movie, The Terminal. And much like The Terminal, narratively it's nothing life-changing, but it provides you a great excuse to go on this universe-trotting adventure, and boy howdy is Astro Bot a journey you'll want to go on. Take all that made the PS5 demo good, and just expand it to a full-size game. A seamless mix of collect-a-thon and course-clearing platformer, you'll journey from various galaxies to rebuild your PS5-looking spaceship, and save all the other bots scattered throughout the universe. Now some people and games journalists have said it's just a Mario Galaxy ripoff, and shouldn't have won Game of the Year. I have just one thing to say to the people that make that kind of comment.
Man, shut up, man. You're trying to trick me, man. Put smoke into my freaking head and shit, man.
Sure, in terms of setting and visuals, it's similar, but if anything, it's a love letter to all 3D platformers, specifically those of the 90s and 2000s. It has the expressive googly eyes on everything character design from Banjo and Conquer, the sense of inertia and speed from Sonic Adventure, the floatiness in its jumping and gliding of Rayman, the charm of Kirby, and for the secret levels and some of the later ones, the difficulty of Crash. While it does pull from a lot of sources, their implementations are unique to Astro, which gives it a familiar yet fresh vibe. It reminds me of the games I played on the floor of my bedroom when I got my PlayStation 1, and my dad would walk by and see me playing them and say one of his silly dadisms like, "I thought I told you to clean this fucking room!" Astro champions a theme park style of level design, with each being distinct from the one before. While it does repeat level themes and the tried and true platformer formula of meadow, beach, beach, desert, lava, and ice, they're so sparingly used you barely even notice when they are repeated. They're also wildly different when they are. The first snow level is made of ice cream and sprinkles, which is never repeated. The initial beach level has you scale a mountain and fight a Titan-sized robot pirate, while another one has you cleaning up litter. One lava level has you platforming to survive and fighting another mecha pirate, while another one has you help a volcano with the head cold. Also, it kinda nails water sections and levels. Often the bane of platformers, here movement is intuitive and open enough that you never get frustrated by obstacles, and there's only one dedicated water level that's actually really cool, with a power-up that only shows up here and in one of the DLC levels. Hell, most of the power-ups show up only a handful of times. It's not because of a lack of confidence in them, rather when a power-up is repeated, it feels at home in its level and use case, and none of them ever feel like they outright replace what Astro can do already, or make the base experience feel lesser without them, something a lot of platformers can struggle with. They're also all multifunctional, even the ones that only seem to do one thing. The boxing frogs allow you to pummel enemies, but they also allow you to swing about like Spider-Man. The pufferfish allows you to float, quickly surface while underwater, and may potentially trigger an inflation fetish.
To make her even bigger! Whoa, you're not kidding, Bentley. She's getting...
This better not awaken anything in me.
The elephant's vacuum utility is completely dependent on what substance you drained, and even something as basic as the time stop headset can be used for combat and slowing enemies to a crawl for easy hits, or platforming to freeze objects into a makeshift path. Hell, the card dealer enemies force you to approach them with both use cases in mind. Also, the fact that the majority of them are actually characters themselves gives the game even more personality, something it already had in large supply. It all feels so true to what this game and the previous has established. This gives all the levels a unique feel, making the game feel far more memorable and longer than it actually is. This is also helped by the smattering of missing bots in each level, needed not only to progress to later galaxies, but also to populate the crash site, enticing you to revisit levels and find them all, while also creating this fun feeling of cooperation, which was no doubt the key to creating the game, and gives completion a visual component. And there's some deep cuts with some of these cameo bots. Like, seriously, who actually remembers Mr. Mosquito? But I also realize that there's a very vocal part of the gaming community that hates the throwbacks to previous PlayStation icons, feeling it's a hollow corporate ploy to pander to nostalgia. Sure, it's very pro PlayStation, but here I feel it's less of a corporate mandate and more a testament to the love the devs clearly have for gaming, which extends to the post-boss levels in each galaxy where you take the role of a PlayStation mascot. Sure, Aloy, Nathan Drake, and Kratos are all no-brainer brand synergistic picks, but what about Ape Escape and Loco Roco being the first and last of these mascot levels, and arguably the most memorable picks? You know who wants a new game in those franchises? Because there's only two people, whoever at Team Asobi annoyed PlayStation into submission for their inclusion, and me. Astro just oozes pure joy from the moment you boot it up, and reminds me of playing games like Spyro for the first time. It fires on all cylinders from level design, music, art direction, and they were still releasing free DLC levels while I was writing this script, giving you even more reasons to love it. If you've ever wanted those classic 90s 3D platformers to make a comeback and you have a PS5, I'm hard-pressed to think of another game next to near as good as Astro Bot. This isn't just Sony's Mario Galaxy, it's a celebration of the entire genre. For Astro the character, I hope this is only the beginning, because my only real complaint is I wanted more. Not because there's a lack of content, but because what is here is so good, I'm hard-pressed to name a game in recent memories I found as utterly charming as Astro. Well, maybe one. A few months ago I was watching a state of play and saw a really charming game. Then I promptly forgot about it as TikTok and the ever-rotating door style of content that is modern entertainment has inflicted me with the attention deficit debuff. Luckily, that endless thirst for content would reunite me with said game, and the fact that it launched free on PS Plus immediately shot it to the top of my list. The Plucky Squire is the debut game from indie dev All Possible Futures, and wow does it make a splash. You take the role of Jot, aka the Plucky Squire, the main character of a series of children's books of the same name, alongside his friends Thrash and Violet, guided by a rather groovy wizard mentor. Everything's going according to the script until Humpgrump, the big bad, hits you so hard he adds an extra dimension to you. What follows is a surprisingly meta game about trying to stop Humpgrump from ruining the book and the future of the child that owns it. And yes, they actually address the existential dread the characters feel from realizing their characters in a children's book, with writing that borders on Dan Harmon levels of nihilistic dread. red. I mention story because A, I guess that's just my format, and B, it's surprisingly engaging. It's nothing that'll set the world on fire, but it kind of reminds me of the films I'd watch as a kid with jokes that would go over my head, but as an adult you're like, holy shit, he had a chub in that scene. You'll notice immediately the majority of the game is a hand-drawn art style that's super expressive and playful, from minute-to-minute gameplay and enemy designs to the mini-games where Jot has a magical girl-style transformation. It's all so expressive, and the 3D models continue the same quality with figurine-like models inspired by Link's Awakening. In fact, a good portion of the game seems to be inspired by Zelda. The combat, having to find items in the world that grant you additional powers to complete puzzles, the isometric perspective in the book. Heck, the way you seamlessly transition from book to real world feels like an inversion of the best Zelda, A Link Between Worlds signature mechanic. Yeah, I said it, at me. But if it pulls so heavily from Zelda, can we really call it a 3D platformer? Yes. If, like me, you've recently revisited the likes of Majora's Mask, Ocarina of Time, or Wind Waker, you'll find they actually share a lot of DNA with 3D platformers. That may be in part to the former two being built in the same engine as Mario 64, but Zelda 2 pulled heavily from side-scrolling platformers. And much like the best 3D platformers, every level in the Plucky Squire is constantly reinventing itself with new minigames and gimmicks. And the fact that each screen has the fold of the book down the middle is a super nice touch. And it's not just utilized visually. Some puzzles are solved with words given to you on a given page, forcing you to flip back to previous pages in the chapter, which is clever but simple enough that it's not overwhelming. It also has an effect on the platforming, with some sections spinning you out of the book for falling off the page, or requiring you to launch from one page to another, or having you leave the book to grab an item to make platforming possible in the book. Or heck, you can just leave the book and bypass obstacles entirely in some sections. There's some real clever uses of it, and Jot isn't just limited to his own book. He can jump into doodles and sticky notes scattered across the real world to scale parts he otherwise wouldn't be able to, and it also allows you to interact with other fictional characters, such as an elf archer in a Magic the Gathering card to borrow her bow, or a baby rocket from a novelty mug that needs help finding his dad and helps you fly. And that also somehow culminates in a combined reference to Space Harrier, Fantasyland, and G.I. Joe in a section of the game that could only get more 80s coded if Kenny Loggins was playing over the top of it. Danger zone. It all feels very considered and takes the book and real world shifting from gimmick to ingrained mechanic and makes the game feel like its own beast rather than just aping others, not dissimilar to Astro Bot's execution. However, unlike Astro, the game suffers from first game syndrome. What do I mean? Well, for one, it doesn't feel as confident in its once-off sections, with some minigames being really short and others definitely overstaying their welcome. The enemies are a little spongy, there's not really that many difficult sections outside of some forced stealth, but that's more cumbersome than hard per se, and the game can feel a little too slow. But if, like me, you're a Game Boy in your 30s and constantly fear the world's end in nuclear fire, then you may also know a lot of people with mini-humans asking for games to play with them. And this is far and away the best option in recent memory. I mean, seriously, some of the games designed for kids these days look like they were made in the video game equivalent of a sweatshop, or worse, conditions them for a crippling gambling addiction later in life. So yeah, maybe stick with the Plucky Squire. Now I know what you're thinking. Is that joke in bad taste? Well, I did write and record it weeks before the LA fires were even a thing, but if you're still mad, maybe get mad at someone that actually deserves it, like the mayor who slashed the budget of the fire department in LA, or all those insurance companies that just decided to cancel people's fire insurance. You know, despite the fact that wildfires happen in California all the time. Just a thought. As for the Plucky Squire, can this really be considered a 3D game when most of it's set in 2D? If it's good enough for Sonic Generations, which is mostly 2D, I'd say Plucky Squire gets the pass too. Speaking of Sonic Generations, I've always liked Sonic the Hedgehog from my initial introduction to him being handed a remote without batteries while my cousin gaslit me into thinking I was playing, and begging my mum to buy me issues of the Fleetway comics at any newsagents I saw them in, despite the fact that they were nightmare fuel. However, the obsession truly began for me with Sonic Adventure 2. It was everything I wanted. Crazy levels, mechs, a digital pet simulator, a weirdly attractive anthropomorphic femme fatale, and Shadow. Shadow feels like a character made for me. I'm a sucker for red and black color schemes, his edginess was very much in line with my constant urge to listen to Breaking Benjamin and Linkin Park, and we have the same taste in women. But despite very clear fan appeal, Shadow's not really been present in recent years. A mistake Sonic X Shadow's Generations Generations has corrected. Following the Super Mario 3D World style of re-release, where we get a modern way to play a certified classic, alongside a side game that could have honestly stood on its own. Taking place around the same time as the older game it's bundled with, it sees Shadow fighting off his old nemesis, alien squid Satan.
Shadow, it's me, the devil. I'm here to convince you to do sin.
I joke, but the narrative continues the quality of writing that was seen in Sonic Frontiers, which is good. While it does revisit levels, plot points, and even the main villain from prior games, the time displacement of Generations introduces an interesting wrinkle with the presence of Maria and Professor Gerald, ostensibly Shadow's only family. It might seem like a minor change, but they're integral parts to Shadow's character, and they are in a way his Uncle Ben. This particular scenario presents Shadow a chance to correct his greatest failing, while also addressing how much Shadow, and by extension Sonic Team, lives in the past. While it may offer him comfort in the form of Maria, it also leads him to stewing in negative thoughts as framed by the return of Black Doom. There's even a visual aspect to this with the new Doom powers that mutate his body into something more demonic and alien. But story is just the side dish of any Sonic game. What you came here for is the gameplay. While I did compare Shadow Generations to Bowser's Fury, its design is way more anachronistic to the game it's bundled with. Rather than using Generations as the basis for Shadow's campaign, it instead builds off of Frontier's foundations, not only because that structure offered more control in the 3D space, but it also felt more akin to the structure of the adventure games, which brings Generation full circle in a way, as during development the adventure style was actually considered before being cut, which means an idea that has been 10 years in development hell has been delivered on, but it also adds something fresh to the Sonic formula. A major issue I've had with Shadow is that aside from animations, there's never really been a proper differentiation between him and his Azure rival, unless you count that one time he was packing. Which is a real shame, as the series has always had mechanically diverse characters, and from his earliest appearance, Shadow was always propped up as a supernaturally gifted entity, but no game ever capitalized on it. Until now. Shadow feels simultaneously new and different at the same time, not unlike the design mentality of Dante and Virgil in Devil May Cry 5. He has the same boost and homing attack as Sonic, however, he has a few additions that make him drastically different. Chaos Control stops time, which opens up alternative paths, removes level hazard, and shaves off precious seconds for speedrunning. Unlike Sonic, Shadow immediately warps to an enemy rather than physically moving through the air. It may sound like a minor change, but the teleport allows Shadow to bypass certain obstacles that Sonic would just fly into. It also makes you think more about homing attacks, as Shadow still physically moves to springs and balloons, forcing you to be aware of your targets, especially if they have spikes or electric shields around them. It's so well thought out, it almost feels like this has just been the norm for Shadow, which is all the more surprising that Sonic Team still decided to expand on his abilities even more with the Doom powers. As you progress through the game, Shadow's deadbeat space dad tries to buy his love with unholy power-ups that expand his kit. Initially I thought, he's kinda cute, but I don't know how much use they'll be.
You've got some attitude, mister.
Doom Blast lets you open up entirely new paths, or straight up sequence break if you know where to use it. Doom Surf means you no longer have to worry about water like Sonic does, and can even be comboed into from a dash for a quick burst of speed. Doom Morph, which I thought would just be a derivative of Doom Surf, turns you into a Splatoon Inkling, allowing you to swing off flying balls of snot or slingshot off them into the air like Spider-Man. Doom Wing lets Shadow glide through the air, and is essentially a unique super form to Shadow for this game. But even that has layers, as it offers unlimited boost if you're touching the ground, and if you know how, it can majorly cut down on the time you spend in a level with that glide aspect I mentioned. They feel great to use and fit perfectly in each level. Even the 2D sections are a massive improvement over what we saw in Sonic Frontiers, where they felt completely different and worse than their 3D counterparts. The selection of levels is also really solid, with a focus primarily on industrial or rugged landscapes, which really suits Shadow's character. And the music, god damn! I am fully convinced that if Medicate Me by Rain City Drive didn't drop last year, Base Colony Arc would have been my most played track on Spotify. All of these tracks, fantastic remixes of the original song that celebrate the franchise in a really fun and fresh way, especially the Overworld's theme, which is this somber and instrumental version of All Hail Shadow. That being said, the game isn't perfect. For one, not all Doom powers are created equal, with Doom Spear hardly seeing any real use outside like 2 locked doors in the Overworld, and the fact that the Radical Highway stage stage and sections, plural, disable chaos control can feel a bit like the game taking away your favorite toy just because it feels like it. The story also feels way too rushed and it doesn't have a lot of time to breathe, and the inclusion of Chaos Island is a bit strange given Shadow isn't even mentioned in Sonic Frontiers. And the total lack of levels from Shadow's own game at launch is a bit of an oversight, especially given the movie DLC kinda is and isn't Westopolis from that game. But these are all just minor nitpicks, and what's here is so polished, I've bought it twice. And by the way, it runs really well on the Steam Deck, which is always nice to see. I'd love to see Sega continue this trend with some of the other woodland critters Sonic hangs out with, or even branch out a bit more with them, like a collectathon game with Rouge or Knuckles, or even just more levels designed around Tails or Shadow's unique abilities, or hell, bring back Silver, that could be kind of fun. But what do you guys think? Are we in a renaissance for 3D platformers? Do you think that there were any other bangers that came out this year? Let me know in the comments below. You know that comment the nasally dickhead at the start made about a terrible top 5 video? Well, it's redemption time, fuckface. I have been tentatively keeping an eye on Victory Heat Rally ever since I saw some footage of it on Twitter before I abandoned that sinking ship for Blue Sky, and I am so glad I did, both leaving Twitter and following this game. Victory Heat Rally, or VHR if you're feeling naughty, is one of the best racing games I've ever played. A classic arcade-style racer that emulates the generation of games found before 3D was the norm in the industry, using 2D sprites on 3-dimensional tracks, a la Mario 64, alongside the course mastery and sense of speed of F-Zero, all wrapped up in a super poppy art style that feels like the best Newgrounds game, Friday Night Funkin', game I love, but suck at horribly. I get blue-balled so often in that game, you may as well call the MC Kevin. Hey! But it's not all just style and no substance. There's a ton of depth to the racing, with each racer having their own stats, and unlike other arcade racers, they actually matter. Not only are you doing your typical 3-lap tracks, but there's also single sprint rally tracks that are filled with long winding roads where you have a co-pilot guiding you through it, which is just super unique for this type of game. Each tour also has you attempt each race in a cup before having you run them back to back. Not only does this expand the runtime of the game, but allows you to get a grip on the individual tracks and bank up medals, which unlock the optional challenges. That allows you to perfect your racing line, handling, and boosting in a fun arcadey score attack style challenge. The cups also spice things up with the addition of an NPC poised as your rival and made more challenging to reflect that, after which you can challenge them to a one-on-one, which is a boss battle where your health is depleted based on your lead in the race. A really clever idea I've never seen before and would love more racing games to adopt. It also has amazing music, with an infectious techno soundtrack that burrows into your brain like the tadpoles in Baldur's Gate 3. It's also really hard. Like, if you're not paying attention, you will mess up and the AI will punish you. But much like Shadow, it's a game I couldn't put down, and now permanently has a place on my Steam Deck and PC, just in case I want to grind down paint jobs for my characters, relive the throwback to Initial D in some of the tracks, drool over how good the character designs are, or how funny I find the Big Crush screams when you rear-end another driver into hell. Victory Heat Rally is the most slept on game of this year, and that's a real shame because you can tell from just playing it, a lot of love was put into it by developer Sky Devil Palm. Hell, the credits list more people as special thanks than actual people who worked on it, which is really sweet, and they even dedicated it to the late great Akira Toriyama. Speaking of, I love Dragon Ball. I have read every volume of the manga, I rewatched the Majin Vegeta Goku fight like biannually, and I'm dripped out with this bomber jacket and these PJs. But despite that, I didn't care about Sparking Zero, and can you blame me? Anime games, especially recently, haven't been great. Jump Force was ugly and not fun, Jujutsu Kaisen Clash decided to bring DVD menu designers out of retirement for its UI, and despite how cult-like One Piece fans are, no one talks about that RPG they made a few years ago. And Dragon Ball isn't immune to bad games. Point in case, Kakarot thought fishing using a monkey tail butt plug was a good idea. Sparking Zero, however, is a return to a very specific era of Dragon Ball games, specifically games from the PS2 era, which are some of the best the franchise has to offer. But is Sparking Zero a good follow-up? Yes. This is one of the most fully realized games I've played in quite some time. I mean, it's a fighting game that at launch has over 180 playable characters. Sure, most of them are different flavors of Goku, but who else are they gonna add? Launch? God, I had such a crush on her as a kid. It's also a masterclass in animation, with all the energy beams, combos, and power-ups really capturing the sense of power the anime is famous for. The story mode also features a good few characters to play as, with each having what-if scenarios. Some are a bit basic, but a lot go totally off the rails and add an additional few hours to that character's campaign, with surprisingly good writing, to the point it makes you wonder where these writers were during Dragon Ball Super's run.
Egghead murderer! Hold your fire! This man isn't black!
What were they thinking?
Core gameplay is simple, only really involving like 2 buttons for combos, but the depth comes in connecting each one of them into one another to control the flow of a fight. It's an easy to learn, hard to master system with some surprising depth, and some of the story mode fights are actually really challenging too, especially if you want to get those what-if requirements, and will get you to grips with a good amount of the tech. Stages are also super detailed with a lot of destructibility, that's not a word, which makes the frenetic pace of the combat even more impactful. It also has a ton of content. The Battle Pass style mission screen to earn in-game currency for various missions, tournaments that can add special restrictions, 3 sets of Dragon Balls to collect, an encyclopedia section that kind of feels like the old trophy room in Smash Bros. Please bring this back, Nintendo. And a ton of characters, skills, and skins to unlock. The voice actors also deserve special mention because they killed it. I have revisited the various arcs of Dragon Ball dozens of times, and this is one of the most interesting ways to re-experience it. Sean Schemmel, who plays Goku, really gives it his all and has completely changed how I see certain scenes. And it's nice to see that even after 25 years, he still has it and wants to show up for this character. It's really cool to see how much respect has been given to the source material, which makes sense given how Dragon Ball is so beloved that after its creator's death, the cartel called a temporary ceasefire.
No f***ing fighting!
All that being said, the game is far from perfect. Cell. For one, it's noticeably unbalanced by design. Real ones will remember what it was like to have a friend pick Gogeta Super Saiyan 4 in Budokai 3 and win by mashing square, a sin punishable by beating them with the permanently grease-stained Mad Catz controller they force you to play with. And Sparking Zero keeps that spirit alive with characters like Goku Ultra Instinct and the infamous GT Fusion being way more powerful than like 9/10 of the roster. While the what-if stories are great, some of the animations and character episodes are just static images with no animation or really basic stuff, which is crazy given how amazing what they chose to animate looks. It also feels like a good bit is missing. Characters from the recent film, Android 21 from Fighters, or even more crazy characters like Pilaf, Devilman, or some of the characters from the later part of the manga not being present feel like glaring omissions. And finally, this critique I could level at like 99% of anime games. Why no anime OST? Like, they have the final opening for Super in the game, but how hype would it be if tracks like Power to Resist or Vegito vs Zamasu could kick in? Like, that'd be so cool. I mean, realistically, I just want the Faulkner soundtrack from Z, which, by the way, I don't know where this idea that his soundtrack was bad came from, because it's not, and it would be so cool in this game. Imagine just dominating some scrub who's trying to cheese a win to the Final Flash music.
You too possess a god's power.
Cinema. I know it sounds like I have a lot of issues with the game, but I had way more fun with it than I have had with a licensed game in quite some time. Is it the best Dragon Ball game? No. That crown still comfortably sits on Fighter's head, but this is a very close second. And hey, if you haven't played a Dragon Ball game in a while, or you love the Budokai Tenkaichi games on the PS2, you owe it to yourself to check it out. So there you go, a bunch of cool platformers you should check out, and an attempt at redemption for a terrible top 5 video I made that still haunts me. And this one is already succeeding because all these games actually came out this year, which was hard for me to do because I really wanted to talk about Pseudoregalia. That was a 2023 game, and you should always play it. Legitimately one of the best 3D platformers I've ever played. But what do you guys think? Are there any other sweet 3D platformers that came out this year? Or should we take Game of the Year off Astro and just kill the genre? Also, for those wondering, this wasn't even the Sonic video I teased in that last video. It's a completely different one. Like, that one's still in the works. And if you didn't watch that video, I get it. It's an hour long and my most disliked video. But I thought it was alright. If you want to see a similar video to this one, I did one last year you can check out on a bunch of games that I felt were slept on in 2023. Don't forget to sub and ring that bell for when I upload in another 6 months, or do something like this video out of spite for a random commenter recognizing that pattern in my upload schedule.